Senator Cotton, appreciate you being with us, sir. I know you got a new book out, Seven Things You Can't Say About China. Why don't we start with that, actually, before we got a lot of things to run through with you today? But what are some things you can't say about? Why can't we just say whatever we want about China? This isn't Germany. They're not knocking down doors for memes yet.
Thanks, guys, for having me on to talk about seven things you can't say about China. I focused in the book's title on the censorship aspect of it because it highlights the pervasive influence and leverage that China has throughout America. You might recall 5 years ago, I think 5 years ago this week, in the winter of 2020, that I first said the Wuhan coronavirus probably came from that super lab in Wuhan, not from the food market. I expected Chinese communist officials to condemn me for that and say that it was false. But if you recall, it was also piled on by lots of American elites, Washington Post, CNN, the New York Times, and others, in part because so many American elites are ready to man the ramparts on behalf of communist China. So the seven things you can't say, and I go through each one of these chapter by chapter, is that China is an evil empire. China is preparing for war. China is waging an economic world war. China has infiltrated our society. China has infiltrated our government. China is coming for our kids, and China could win. It's that economic world war that has really got China to the point of power and influence. Of course, one, it underwrites the massive military buildup, the largest in history, that allows China to prepare for war, but it also gives them vast influence in American society, in business, education and cultural institutions, and our governments as well. A simple and maybe well-known example is Hollywood. When was the last time you saw a Chinese villain in a Hollywood movie? It's been a very long time, because when Brad Pitt made 7 Years in Tibet in 1997, China came down on him in the studio like a ton of bricks. And studio executives knew from that point forward, you can't say anything bad about China. Otherwise, they'll cut off access to the lucrative and massive Chinese movie market. But guys, did you know, because I think a lot of Americans don't know, that every network except for Fox News is owned by or affiliated with one of those Hollywood studios? ABC and Disney, CBS and Paramount, NBC and MSNBC by Comcast Universal, CNN by Warner Brothers. Is it a surprise that those networks host a presidential debate and don't ask a single question about China? That Fox News is consistently the network that is strongest on China, the most clear-eyed about the threat they pose? I don't think it is. And that's replicated across so many segments of our society, whether it's corporate America, Wall Street, professional sports, higher education, all designed to protect China as it goes forward with its campaign to replace America as the world's dominant military and economic superpower.
I love everything you just laid out, and it is fascinating. I never really thought about the overlap between the news business and the Hollywood studios. Where I came from, Senator Cotton, you may well remember, world of sports. I've never seen anything like the NBA's bending of the knee to China. They would rip American institutions to the high heavens. It's actually how they've destroyed, in my opinion, much of their brand. People love basketball. They don't like being lectured by multimillionaire athletes about how awful America is, while they simultaneously bend the knee to China. I saw recent reports that the NBA may be about to go back to China. What is that impact? And I don't know how much you talk about it in the book, but I think it's incredibly impactful what they have allowed the NBA to do, which is rip America to shreds while saying nothing at all critical of China because they're afraid of what China will do to them.
Yeah, I write about it at some length because, again, I think it's important that Americans know that, it's not just, Chinese spies in Washington who are trying to steal intelligence or military secrets. The threat, again, is pervasive and present throughout all of our lives. And I write about professional sports and specifically the NBA because the NBA is the most popular American sport in China, and China is the NBA's largest overseas market. And if you recall, back in 2019, before China finally cracked down once and for all on Hong Kong and violated its promises to Hong Kongers to have freedom and autonomy for 50 years after Great Britain handed Hong Kong over in 1997, the general manager of the Houston Rockets posted on social media nothing more than just an image saying that we should stand with Hong Kong.
That's right.
And of course, China came down like a ton of bricks on the NBA and on the Rockets in particular. They pulled NBA games off of their streaming services and state television. They suspended streaming for the Rockets in particular. They stopped selling Rockets merchandise in their stores. They suspended cooperation with the Rockets. And where was the NBA as an institution? Nowhere to be found. The team didn't support him. The league didn't support him. Social justice warriors, LeBron James and Stephen Kerr, who are bound for the Hall of Fame, also didn't support him. In fact, they condemned him, said that he was misinformed or that he needed to be educated on the situation. Maybe I think what LeBron James meant is that he needed to be re-educated along the lines of what China would do. ESPN, who is not only the broadcast partner of the NBA, but also, again, a corporate affiliate of Disney that has massive operations in China, didn't even cover the situation. But China still wasn't placated. They demanded that Mori be fired. Adam Silver said not. But strangely enough, within a year, he was out of a job, and the Rockets were back on TV in China. And that's not the only example. The Brooklyn Nets CEO, who came to his defense, one of the few figures in the world of professional basketball who came to his defense, quote unquote, resigned after just 2 months on the job. And guess who owns the Brooklyn Nets? Joe Tsai, who is one of the founders of the Chinese retail giant Alibaba and is a frequent apologist for the Chinese Communist Party. And of course, that's not the only case, too, involving the NBA. Remember, our friend, Enes Kanter Freedom,
yes,
who had long time been a voice on behalf of ordinary Turkish people who were suffering under their own repressive government, began to take up the cause of the Uyghur people, a religious and ethnic minority in northwest China that both the Trump and the Biden administration said were suffering from a genocide. 2 million, maybe 3 million had gone into re-education camps and indoctrination, and simply wore shoes that criticized Xi Jinping or called out the plight of the Uyghurs, or he stood up for Tibet, something that liberals in Hollywood have long done. And what happened? He was cut not too soon after from the NBA. And he's told me, and I believe him, that he feels that he was blacklisted by the NBA. This is just an example, again, of the pervasive influence that China has in our country and in our society. And it goes far beyond economic ties as well. Every cultural institution in America faces this. You probably heard of sister city programs that, American cities partner with foreign cities. And that's fine if your foreign city is, I don't know, in Spain or South Korea or something. But in China, it comes with strings. And the strings are they want to turn you into a de facto lobbyist on behalf of communist China, not just related to your particular city, like, call your congressman so you can get a visa to come travel to your sister city in China. No. Tell your congressman that he should stop speaking out about Hong Kong.
We're speaking to Senator Tom Cotton. He's got a new book. He's got a new book out today, 7 Things You Can't Say About China. You can go get your copy. Senator Cotton, you've been getting some headlines on the Hill and some other places. Charlie Kirk tweeted out something about how, or I guess we call posting it now on X. You've got some concerns. This is the first that I've heard you've had concerns about any of the Trump nominees, but it has to do with what we're talking about a bit, because it would be the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy at the Pentagon, Bridge Colby. I know you've addressed this a little bit, but I'm just wondering if you could, for all of us, address, is this just you want to hear more from Bridge about where he stands now on some issues? And what can you tell us about this reporting that you have some real reservations about a very senior level Trump Pentagon appointee? Full disclosure, I've known Bridge for 20 years, so I might be able to help fill in some gaps of my own here, but go ahead.
Sure. Well, with any nominee, but especially nominees in critical national security roles at defense or state or the Intelligence Committee, we always want to probe their views and see if those are aligned with the president's priorities. of course, one of the president's highest priorities, and one of mine since the very first day I got into the Senate, is to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. When I came to the Senate, President Obama was in the final days of negotiating the nuclear deal with Iran. And in fact, that was the first time I ever spoke to Donald Trump. He was a new candidate, and he called me and wanted to express his thanks and admiration for the work I was doing fighting against that deal and fighting against a nuclear Iran. So with all these nominees, if they play any role in trying to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, I and other senators are going to want to have questions in our meetings with them and our hearings with them to ensure they're aligned with the president's priorities. That's not out of the ordinary. That's pretty customary. If you look at the stuff that's gone on over the last 2 or 3 weeks, guys, you can see, for instance, that Bobby Kennedy, who had been pro-choice his entire life, when I met with him, and then when he testified at the committee, said that he would support President Trump's pro-life policies.
Gotcha. So you have, not to, sorry, we're going to come to a break. It sounds like you have questions for Bridge. I mean, I know he's very aligned, I think, with you on China, for example, which is what the book is about. I think you could say he's a China hawk for sure. But on the Iranian issue, you have questions. But if the answers to those questions are satisfactory, in line with President Trump and with his agenda for national security in the Middle East and beyond, you don't have a problem with the credentials or the background or anything like that.
I look forward to speaking to him about what he's written about Iran in the past, where he thinks now, how he sees that fitting in with President Trump's declared priority of stopping Iran from getting nuclear weapons. Again, that's a common part of the process that we did with Bobby Kennedy.
Sure.
That we did.
How do you? I mean, you served, by the way. How do you think Secretary Hegseth? Just real quick, I wanted to know, what do you think about Secretary Hegseth so far? Clay and I have been having fun talking about just some of the visuals.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a refreshing change to have a secretary who's a little bit closer to our age and therefore closer to the soldier's age, who was himself a veteran. We've had very fine secretaries of defense who are in their 60s or 70s, but it obviously offers a different perspective. And I think he's already taken some steps to change some policies that were implemented in the Biden era that were foolish, that diminished readiness, that focused our troops on trivialities or distractions, as opposed to being ready to fight and win our nation's wars, and therefore preventing them from happening in the first place. Now, he's got longer-term challenges that are going to take years for all of us to tackle, like rebuilding our industrial capacity, making sure that we have the kind of next-generation fighters that can counteract China, that our shipbuilding's in a place where we can counteract China as well. But on the things that he can do on the first days in the job, I think he's off to a good start. For instance, getting the Army and the Marine Corps and the Air Force and the Navy focused back on fighting our nation's wars, not social engineering, or not making sure they're using the right pronouns, or using, addressing climate change in the way they train and so forth.
We're trying, as you know, to get a ceasefire and a resolution in Ukraine with Russia. And we just had Marco Rubio talking with the Russians face-to-face for the first time in years in Saudi Arabia. I'm curious what you think about those conversations. And in particular, there has been a discussion that one of the demands might be an election in Ukraine, which Zelensky has not allowed since the invasion happened. Should there be a Ukrainian election? Should it be connected to the idea of a ceasefire and peace? How would you assess where we are right now?
Yeah, I mean, guys, I think Joe Biden left us all a mess. That's the bottom line. Joe Biden's weakness tempted Putin to invade in the first place. Biden pussyfooted around for 3 years. And I think in retrospect, it's clear that his plan was to lose, just wait till after the election. And that's what the president and all of us have to deal with right now. And I think what the president is trying to achieve is what J.D. Vance said in Europe last week, Ukraine's sovereign independence, and preventing a third invasion of Ukraine in the future. So to do that, we need to have a lasting truce that will allow Ukraine to get back on its feet, as you say, to have elections again, to have long-term prosperity. I think that's an important point as well. Lindsey Graham has floated the idea of having a long-term minerals deal with Ukraine. That would give them, one pillar of long-term economic growth, while also giving us what we need, which is more independence from China to acquire the kind of rare earth minerals that are necessary in a modern electronic economy. Now, is this going to be something that everyone is satisfied with? Is this what one might have hoped for? a year, 2, 3 years ago? Probably not. But it's what Joe Biden has left us with, and we've got to do the very best we can to try to get that durable truce that protects Ukraine's sovereign independence and doesn't lead to a third invasion of Ukraine as we've had the first and second invasion under the last 2 Democratic presidents.
The book is 7 Things You Can't Say About China. Go check it out. Senator Tom Cotton, we appreciate the time. Look forward to talking to you again sometime soon. Enjoy the book tour.
Thank you.
Again, the book, 7 Things You Can't Say About China. That was Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton. Go check it out. Look, we've been talking about the importance of historical literacy. Trust me, we need way more of it in the United States in terms of being able to make the right policy decisions. How's your historical literacy? What kind of historical knowledge do you have? Would you like to increase your knowledge so that you can better analyze and understand the challenges we face today? If so, trust me on this. Go to clayandbuckforhillsdale.com. No cost, easy to get started, 40-plus courses on everything under the sun. World War I, World War II, Winston Churchill, C.S. Lewis if you're into literature, Mark Twain. How about the history of the Constitution, the history of the Founding Fathers? Trust me and go check this out. You'll love it. On your timetable, clayandbuckforhillsdale.com. No cost. Check it out, clayandbuckforhillsdale.com.